Well, you've heard me say it here a number of times, and that is that I believe God can use anything that he desires to reach a person with the gospel so that they can be saved. Well, I've been put to the test to see if I really do believe what I say, and I don't want to be a hypocrite. And yes, I do believe this. And this challenge came just a few days ago when an artist by the name of T Suffering reached out to me to tell me about a music project that he has been reaching people that are in the deepest and darkest places. Now, this is not your typical Christian ministry or project. It's not what we would imagine as being refined or finished or polished. Rather, it's a Christian Unblack Metal project. Yes, I really do believe in researching what T Suffering's doing and the music that he's creating, that it is indeed reaching people. In fact, that it's reaching a group of people that the church as a whole has been struggling trying to reach. So I'm very excited to share with you an interview that I've done with T Suffering to talk about how God is using him and how he is walking with Jesus. And I think you're going to be very surprised and even encouraged with what he says during this interview. Well, with me is T Suffering, and I'd like to welcome you to Raven's Heart.
Thanks again for having me.
It's really exciting to have you. As I said before we started recording this edition, that as I was preparing for it, I was really learning a lot, because Christian Unblack Metal or Unblack Metal is not necessarily my wheelhouse, but I think it's something that God sees as necessary. And we're going to get more into that in just a few moments. But can you share with us, what is Unblack Metal and how does it differ from black metal?
So black metal, really, as far as my understanding of it, originated from a more raw, faster kind of speed metal, thrash metal type thing in the early 80s. Where Unblack Metal came in seems to be in the early 90s. Everyone references Horde, but I think Antester was around the same time as well. Unblack Metal takes the usually really dark themes. Most black metal is, or at least when it started, was based around Satanism, things like that. And it kind of turns it on its head. It's really almost, Unblack Metal would be like a rebellion against the black metal norm, is how I would describe it.
Yeah, with both black metal and unblack metal, you got a whole lot of rebellion that's going on. And in some of these instances, the rebellion is actually justified. And I do want to get to that. But you just mentioned Horde on Jason Sherlock's project in 1994. And I like what he says about why he started a Christian unblack metal project. He said, within the black metal scene, all I could see was a bleak, dark, hopeless, lifeless, and negative void. All I wanted to do was shine a light into that darkness. The intention was to give hope and a godly alternative to those people that needed it, to give them truth, and then they can decide how they wanted to proceed. So really what I see going on there with that is evangelism, going into the darker places. And in Mark chapter 15, the Great Commission, Jesus said, go ye into all of the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Now, there's a whole lot of all and every in there. And that even means going into the places that we don't necessarily want to go into or would necessarily agree with, to preach the gospel, to bring the light. It doesn't say, hey, yeah, come to us. We're sitting up here on the hill with our light, which is so much of what the church does today. And I see you in agreement with that, instead of actually going out and sharing the gospel with people. Your comments on that?
So it does engage a certain group of people that otherwise certainly I would not have interacted with, but there's people that have contacted me just here and there, and it's not a whole ton, but to me a few dozen seems like an awful lot. that say, you know, they will ask me questions and I'll give them biblical answers if at all possible. I'm not always the greatest at that, but I try to be honest with them and say, this is where I'm coming from. And I usually get the response, you're not what I expected. And that's, I'm sure a lot of people within the unblack scene get that comment, because you don't go in it telling them immediately how they're wrong, so much as I go into it and say, I have these problems, and they're big problems that a lot of people don't talk about within the within the standard Christian church. And I think people need to hear that and know that they're not the only people that struggle with letting go of things that they should really let go of, or depression, things like that. And it can get to be pretty deep conversations with people about that you just otherwise wouldn't have interacted with.
Well, I mean, Jesus would leave the 99 to go get the one. It's not about the numbers. It's about the impact on people's lives that you have. And that's something that I've even thought about with what we do here at Lithos Cry. It's not like we're this mega major Christian YouTube channel, but I mean, we've got over 4,000 subscribers, which to me is huge. That's most than most churches have that interact with us on a regular basis. So, and it's not about the full numbers. It's about the impact that you have on people's lives. And you never know, it might be that one person that you reach out to that God is going to use in a mighty, mighty way to reach even more. So it's about multiplication. That's what Jesus is about, is not adding, is about multiplying. That's the way that he works. And, there are a lot who would argue that because unblack metal has its roots in black metal, that there's no way that God could ever use such a genre. How would you respond to that argument?
For me, I cannot relate to modern contemporary Christian music at all. It's not something I can listen to and get any sort of emotional reaction out of. Just being honest, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying, for me, it's not something I relate to. But the louder, faster, darker stuff I kind of attached to when I was a lot younger, especially electronic and black metal. It really spoke to me, as far as a lot of the people in it will talk about depression and things like that, and then they throw Satan in there. That I couldn't relate to either. So when you take that out and you kind of read scripture, and I'll say, it might take me a moment to think of this. I apologize. How to word this.
I'll take your time.
So I relate most to Romans. That's where the name of the project comes from. Romans tells you flat out that it probably has the best description of what salvation is in the entire thing. And it tells you right alongside all that stuff, this good and bad stuff is going to happen. It's not going to be easy. And I think that that's often ignored, and it's painted into a very rosy picture, and that's fine, but it doesn't reach me, and it probably doesn't reach a lot of people like me either. So to be upfront and honest about it is why I think unblack metal reaches the certain contingent of people that listen to it.
Yeah, the name of your project is Rejoice in Our Suffering. And when we read scripture, we find a lot about suffering in there. And that's really what the Christian life is about. It's not about the easy road. It's not about, hey, I just walked into a whole bunch of prosperity and every day is going to be a good day. There's a lot of suffering, a lot of dealing with adversaries, a lot of dealing with our flesh, having to die to our flesh. And as I've been thinking about this with the whole black metal scene, they talk about a lot about suffering. And I think there's something built into us where we desire to suffer, but when you look at the black metal scene, it goes the wrong way. It goes to destruction. But when we do suffer, according to the book of Romans, we experience life. We experience true life. Some of the things that I've experienced is the more that I die to myself, the more I put my own agenda aside and just go with what God wants. All of these things start to happen that bring life. I start to experience life to a whole different degree. And it's very different. Black metal is not a very popular genre, and Christian Unblack Metal not very popular, but that's okay. But there's something very interesting that I want to bring up, and I'm glad that you reached out to us over here at Lithos Cry and Raven's Heart, because really what started this this outreach, I would say, is the realization of something that Jesus said in Luke chapter 19 at verse 40, when he rebuked the Pharisees that told him to keep his disciples and those that were following him to quiet down during the triumphal entry. He said, if these be silent, the very rocks will cry out. And there's an element of that word, cry out. Lithos is, for stones and rocks. That's where lithos comes from. But when you take a look at the word for cry out, the word is krazo. That's the Greek word that is used. And my third wheel on the show here, Poe the Raven, says that in black metal, the vocals sound like ravens. And that's exactly what the word krazo in Luke chapter 19 at verse 40 means, is to cry or to sound like a raven. And I think that's one of the signature marks of unblack and black metal is the sound like a raven.
It's definitely that whole passage about the rocks crying out is definitely a good way to describe it. It's definitely when the larger part of the crowd quiets down, that silence that's left and the pain that comes out of that silence is what I would most closely relate unblack metal to, especially. It's definitely, as you said, black metal's a hard sell anyway to even most metal fans. It's pretty rough. It's a lot of things sound like they were recorded on a broken vacuum cleaner. And then you have screaming on top of that, and there's layers of it. You have the very polished stuff, which is, there's nothing wrong with that. But the deeper down you go, the more emotional and boldly honest it gets. There's a lot of stuff out there that I don't even come close to, and I wouldn't bear that much of my soul to people, and people do. And it's the biggest thing is that it's very sincere, and there's nothing wrong with pretty music, but a lot of it isn't what I would describe as sincere, and it is meant to uplift, and that's great. But to me and black metal fans, we probably don't get that out of it. It probably just makes us, it's like driving an ice pick into our brain.
Well, the way that I would describe unblack metal, and I'm even going to touch upon black metal for a minute, it's very unrefined, unpolished, and I would say even unfinished in a lot of ways. And that's an okay thing, because art, let's talk about art in general for a moment. Art is an expression of what's going on inside of the artist's soul. And it's not always going to be. You agree with that?
Authenticity is more important in unblack metal and black metal than technical proficiency or fidelity. By far, sincerity is much more important.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not always a finished, pretty product. You're not going to hear an unblack metal song on K-Love. You're not going to hear an unblack metal song on most Christian rock radio stations. It's something, it's a very specific, what I would call tool that God uses to reach people who are dealing with the issues that the church cannot handle. This is what I see, is that the majority of pastors and church leaders in the United States, and maybe even the world, do not have the tools or the training to deal with the darker issues that some people deal with, that deal with depression, that deal with thoughts of suicide, that deal with things such as schizophrenia and bipolar. And here's the way that it's handled. And I think this is wrong, and we need to get away from this, is that, it's just a demon that you have, and you're not spiritual enough, or you don't read your Bible enough, or, hey, if you're saved, all of this is just going to go away in a minute. And that's just simply not true. T, your comments on that?
So just to share a little bit of my experience personally, and people have it way better than, or way worse than I do. I didn't mean to say better. I mean, there are people out there that have it way worse than I do with the depression thing, but there have been periods where I've sat in a room for 6 months and have only come out at night to eat, and I've only talked to my dog. So yeah, I would say churches really have no idea how to handle that. A lot of the modern churches now are really kind of trained to blast their message out to a larger group of people, as many people as they can get in there. And then once that Sunday service is over, they're gone. Now, I don't have that experience now with my current church. It's actually a very loving, very small church. And they've actually helped me with my depression a lot by basically making it more or less as Christians, we're accountable to other Christians. And I think that's kind of been lost as well in the overall culture of it. Going to church every Sunday does help. But yeah, most churches are ill-equipped to deal with those issues. And I understand it. It's very uncomfortable to talk about someone's innermost feelings, especially I notice that happens a lot amongst men to other men in particular. And that extends out. So
yeah, and it's not, I'm not sitting here just pointing the finger at the church for not being able to deal with mental health issues.
Yes.
Society, our world just doesn't know how to deal with it. We're not very good at it. Just in general. I hear some sort of music in the background. What is that?
I apologize. I meant to turn that off. I have a cuckoo clock and it chimes. I am so sorry. I really didn't even think about it.
I was like, that does not sound like Unblack Metal to me. That's something different.
I'm so sorry about that. I really just forgot to turn that off.
We as a society, especially in the United States, we're really just kind of starting to figure out this whole how to help people with mental health issues. And it's even more imperative now because since 2020, and we're not going to get into the details of that because I don't want to get shadow banned on this edition, but since 2020, the mental health crisis issues have increased. And we all have to take a look at ourselves too. And, there's some will say, well, I don't deal with depression. I don't deal with PTSD. I don't deal with any of that. You probably do. You're human and you just haven't realized that. When people started sharing with me different characteristics of depression and different characteristics of PTSD, I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I've got that. I thought that was just the way I was. I had no idea that I dealt with those issues. And I think what you're doing by actually communicating and relating to people who have those issues at a very deep level through your music is a very profound way that God is using you to reach into those dark areas. I mean, I'm even thinking and have been thinking about Psalm 139, where the psalmist wrote that, if I ascend into heaven, you are there. And if I make my bed in hell, you are there as well. God is omnipotent and he's everywhere. And that's going into those dark places like what you're doing. A lot of people, as we said earlier, would not go into the realm that you've gone into to shed the light that's necessary there. And I think a lot of that goes down to, as well, a misconception that, if I go into these dark areas, the Holy Spirit's going to leave me and I'm going to be by myself. And that comes from this misconception that there's this equal battle between two equals, between God and Satan. No, I'm sorry. Satan's a loser. And that's just what it comes down to. God is omnipotent. There is no equal battle. God has already won the victory. Let's talk about your concept album, Rejoice in Our Suffering. What is the message of the album?
So that one was I didn't intend it to be a concept album. I just wrote about my experience with sin, especially, things I've tried to let go. The first track being Death of the Old Man. Of course, it's something that's talked about a lot in my church, where you put things down that you shouldn't at the moment of repentance and stuff like that. And what no one talks about later is that that's extremely difficult. I mean, there's things that are long-term sins that I still deal with. I smoke cigarettes and I've been trying to quit for a very long time. And it's something I have to put down. It's something I have to let go of. It's extremely hard to, and that's not a big deal, but there are other things too. There's a wrathful side of me that I really don't like. There's I'll just say the meanest things to people every once in a while, and I really have no explanation as to why, other than impatience or just that they've inconvenienced me in some way and don't even know it. And I think there's letting go of things like that is really hard, and it's not often talked about because you celebrate the tiniest victories. And it's me really taking a hard look at all that stuff and saying, I'm opening up my chest here. This is me. This is what I deal with. And that's basically the response I've gotten from people, is that they've been able to look at themselves and see what they struggle with and really relate to how difficult it is. If it doesn't help them get through it, they know they're not the only people that are dealing with horrible things that they just don't know how to deal with.
Yeah. Honesty is the key into being able to start with the deal with the problems. And that's something that we, especially as men, are not very good at, is being honest about the problems and the things that we suffer with on the inside. But, what you're saying reminds me a lot about what the Apostle Paul wrote when he said, I do these things that I don't want to do, and I don't do the things that I ought to do. He was very conflicted. And it's okay to be honest like that. We don't need to be the perfect. Go to the Marilyn Manson song, "The Beautiful People," very profound song. All the beautiful people. We're not supposed to be that way. It's okay to not be okay. Excuse the cliche, but we have to get to the point where we're also brutally honest with God about our condition and where we're at. And I just want to encourage you, keep fighting the good fight, keep putting those things to the side, putting them down, laying down the old man and walking in the newness of Jesus. And I just hear such a sweetness and humility in your voice. You are not what somebody would imagine as an unblack metal artist. They think you're out there roasting puppies on an open fire and doing stuff like that.
This has been an exercise, and I'm very clear about my project not being a ministry. I feel it would be dishonest to call it one. I know a lot of bands do, and that's great. But for me, this project is primarily cathartic for me, and it has given me a way to externalize a lot of the things I don't talk about, and things that I've noticed from other people. And you always think when you're really deep in depression or you feel very isolated and lonely that you're the only person that feels like that. And even though other people will tell you, no, everybody feels like that. You're the only one. You have a unique experience with it. And that's true to an extent, but it can't be that unique. And I think about how many people, because it can't be a unique experience for me, that will sit there and they'll be screaming at themselves inside of their head for a 12-hour day and be unable to get up and do that one tiny thing they have to do. It doesn't matter if it's washing the dishes or whatever. And that's where depression is really insidious and where it takes you over, because that'll just extend. So by externalizing that, it has helped me get up and go and do that things, from hearing from people that say, hey, I do that too. Or, I have a problem with sin too, without being made to feel completely guilty about it, like their faith isn't strong enough or that they're not loved by God. Because, and I've never heard anyone say that, but that is how it feels. That is how it can feel, especially when you really separate yourself from it enough. There is a void there, and you had mentioned something to that effect. And that's really what that album is about. It's what I'm trying to convey with it, is just to externalize it, work through it. And if I suddenly became very happy tomorrow, I could not make this music. I would love for that to happen, but it's not going to. And I don't mean to sound like my life is so miserable. The past actual year has been the best year of my life. I'm extremely happily married. I couldn't be happier with my wife. I have 2 dogs. I have a house. I have everything I need. But again, that's where depression comes in, because everything will be great. It'll be better than it's ever been. And you will still just feel miserable. And people need to know that there are other people out there that feel like that. And yes, you're not alone in that. And it does, it eats at you, because you feel guilty about feeling bad.
Yeah. Well, and the thing is too, and this is what I'd like to encourage everybody in my audience that's watching or listening across the world, that if you don't suffer from these things, you don't understand what it's like. I cannot understand it to the degree that you understand it, because I haven't had those experiences. And I think that's where we get into a lot of trouble as believers, is because we don't understand something to the extent that somebody else does. We label it and we reject it. We put it to the side. It's like, oh, I just can't deal with that, or I don't understand that, or there's something wrong with them. I've got it all right. No, you don't have it all right. No, none of us have it all right. Even those that have been walking with the Lord for many, many years, yes, we are constantly growing in maturity, and that's going to happen for you as well, T. And if you just keep pursuing with Him, finishing the race to the end. A lot of people start well in their walk, but they don't end very well. But I want to encourage you that keep doing it, keep fighting the good fight, and you'll end the race well. And also, too, about ministry, I think that word is used inappropriately a lot of times. It's about a person. It's about a program. It's been, and I try to get away from it as well. I don't really use it very much over here with Lithos Cry. It's a word that really means service or serving someone else. But today, in today's world, we've taken that word to talk about a program or something that you've developed, or my ministry. And one of the things that I've been learning and enjoying more and more is that what I do here is not my ministry. It's Jesus's ministry through me and what He wants to do.
And actually, I like the way you said that it's a program. I would actually relate that. As far as understanding depression, if people would like to understand depression, I think this hasn't been talked about a whole lot either. The kids that are in their most formative years now, that spent the last 3-4 years of their lives locked in a room and only saw their friends on the internet when they were during school hours or what have you. Look at that generation. It's a generation underneath of mine, not philosophically, but they're younger, and a lot of them can't function very well, and people are just mad at them for it because they're not doing well in the job market and things like that. That's society-wide depression, and it's a horrible thing. And those kids are going to have a very hard time growing up as a result of what they experience with that. So, as you said, everyone does experience it. No one has it out, but that, unfortunately, there's a whole group of kids that are really experiencing that very hard, and you can see it in a lot of the identity issues people have, a lot of the anger that people have, which is probably caused by separation from others, because if you're alone, you're not accountable to others around you. Yeah. And that just makes a huge difference.
These are very profound, deep insights. And, even looking at the black metal genre itself, the secular side of it, not the unblack side, but the black side of it, there's this desire really to return to a more primitive time, a simpler time. And what is processed in a lot of that music is what the artists see in the conflict in the world and the destruction as a result of the conflict. And I see it as them trying to make sense. And we were talking about art being unfinished sometimes. Mm-hmm. They're trying to make sense of the world around them. And my goodness, I mean, how much art is there where it doesn't make sense to us, but really what it is the artist trying to make sense of a very chaotic, messed up world around them. And we really need to allow people to be able to venture into this realm of unblack metal that it resonates with them. So that they can feel that they are not alone and have somebody to reach out to you like you. And it's very important that they have somebody to reach out to that can, hey, we've got community. We can talk about this. And there's an area where you can feel safe to talk about these things. How are some ways that your music has helped people?
In particular, my friend Alex, and he's a new friend, and I met him as a result of this thing. He's kind of right at the beginning of making unblack metal himself, and he's talked to me and stuff. He's had some issues with traumatic brain injuries and things like that. I won't go further into it, but he has said it makes him look at his own. I had mentioned it earlier. It makes him look at his own sins and what he's dealing with, and he doesn't feel so alone in it. And that's part of it. the other part of it is I've gotten a few people reaching out because I don't really publish lyrics. I describe them as caveman screaming because that's really what they are. It's a lot of big ideas boiled down into a few words and then repeated a lot. Mm-hmm. And so people have asked me about that, and I've just explained where I'm coming from, and then they'll continually ask for more. They'll eventually open up to the religion thing. Most of them that reach out to me haven't been religious, and they're right up front. They tell me that. They say, this is different. I don't listen to Christian music. Okay. So, and I'll just tell them, I'm not going to get real preachy with you, but it's from Romans. And if you read the first 11 chapters of that book, it's a very clear description of salvation and all the things that come with it. There's good and bad, and the bad is just often skipped over. People like to pretend, if you get saved, everything's going to be easy. In a lot of ways, it gets a lot harder because you become accountable to God, yourself, and everyone around you. And if you ingratiate yourself into a community, if you become part of a church or what have you, you're accountable to all those people too. So It becomes harder in that way, and it makes it a lot harder to just things you would normally do that you didn't realize before were wrong. You're going to have a hard time doing them. That's how I would say it's making people turn the mirror on themselves, because everyone in some way has unresolved things that they're still mad about. And it really makes you turn that mirror on yourself and look at those things for what they are and how much of them are really a part of you, and how they can be made better through Christ. At least that's I kind of went off on a tangent there. I'm sorry, but that's what I've tried to get to people that reach out to me that otherwise might not hear that. You can work through it, but it takes a lot of effort and a lot of becoming part of that community.
Yeah, no, I was tracking the tangent, and it resonates with me, and it's so necessary to hear that. And it's very refreshing to hear that from your perspective of just a basic simplicity of, hey, everybody's got these issues. We need to take a hard look at them. And that's what your music and your art does. And, the Rejoice in Our Suffering concept album, you chose a very specific piece of printed artwork to represent that. Can you tell us about that a little bit? Because it's very fitting for your project. I would call it almost unblack painting.
So artist is, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Gustave Doré is a French artist in the 1800s. The particular piece I chose for that was Adam and Eve getting expelled from Eden. And it's one of those things where when I really thought about it and looked at things for what they were, it's kind of what we all experience when you see that there's a perfection that's available or that's there, but you can't quite get to it. And it's something you're going to deal with forever. I mean, they were expelled from Eden. They knew what it was like to have absolute perfection and everything they could ever have. And we can imagine that, but we can't see it. And Adamic nature is basically the overall theme of it. And there's even, I think the second track on that album is Adamic nature of man. It's just that we're dealing with that no matter what. It's a part of who we are. It's not that we're there's a lot I want to say that I can't quite put into words readily. That there's a reason I chose that. I thought it went very well with it. It's dealing with personal sin. Yeah. And I'd say that there's definitely a huge guilt thing there.
Yeah, we're all dealing with on a daily basis the effects of what happened in the Garden of Eden when Adam and Eve partook of the forbidden fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's what we're dealing with on a daily basis. And just understand this, that the life that we're living right now is not what God intended for us. This was not his intention. It was something far greater, and it was supposed to be pristine. It was supposed to be sinless. It was supposed to be without death, without confusion, without pain, without suffering, without sickness. We're going to get there when Jesus returns and creates a new heaven and a new earth. It is going to happen. And, a lot of people probably are wondering, well, why does God let us go through all of this stuff? And before we close, can you share with us maybe your insights on why does God let us live in this body that's fallen, in this world that's fallen, that's filled with death, sickness, and all this other garbage?
So I'm thinking, I thought of, I believe it's Genesis 6, where it basically says that it grieved him to see the condition humans were in after we were expelled from Eden. And I believe that's a chapter where it wasn't that he was mad at humans. He was very concerned. He seemed very concerned about where we were at. I think God lets us go through these things because it builds character. It builds resilience. And at some point, there's going to be that war between good and evil. And God's already won it, but it'll be necessary to be able to stand there and be strong and defend. If that, am I getting it? Something that makes sense? It's very allegorical.
No, you're really hitting at something into the character building. And this is not a leadership lesson, but really what the character building is, everything that we're going through is preparing us for the next life, preparing us for the new heaven and the earth, preparing us for what God's going to have us do during that time, because there's this huge misconception that, when a person dies that's born again, that's saved, that they're going to go to heaven and they're going to be floating around on a cloud with their butt cheeks hanging out playing harps. No, there's a whole new era. Think of this. This is going to blow your mind. A whole new era and a whole new world that is going to be created, that is going to be akin to what Eden was. And there's going to be people. There's going to be people in it. Not everybody in the book of Revelation dies a gruesome death. And there will be babies born, but there will be those that during this era that were saved and finished well, that will be helping administer and run the kingdom as with Jesus and with David. It's going to be a very amazing time when you really think about it. It's not just, oh yeah, well, I'm just going to go up there and God's going to do what he tells me to do. No, there is a whole new era, whole new world. It's coming. And that's what happens when Jesus returns. Before we close out, where can people go to find your music? And we're going to put the link to your concept album down in the description so people can go there. But what are some places that people can go to find your music? And how can somebody reach out to you if what they've heard you say resonates with them?
So they can reach out to rejoiceinOurSuffering@gmail.com. And I don't have any social media. I've stayed away from that just because it brings out a part of me that I really don't like. They can go to the Bandcamp, rejoiceinOurSuffering.bandcamp.com. And the more listenable stuff I put on all the major streaming services, the more experimental and noisy I keep off of there. I guess that would pretty well sum it up. Hopefully I didn't come across like a complete rambling fool. No.
I really appreciate your genuine heart. That's what I really appreciate. And the reason why I wanted to do this was so that people would see, because I know, and I've seen the debates on the Christian metal forums that, oh, God can't use unblack metal. No, that can't be used and shouldn't be listening to that. And that's just totally demonic. But I wanted people to see your heart and how God is actually using this and how this fits into the command that Jesus gave us to go into the darkest depths of hell with the light that we have. And that's what you're doing, is God is using you to take his light to give people hope in him, to give them hope of salvation. And that is a very commendable commendable thing that you're doing. And we have to remember that the least in the kingdom will be the greatest in the future.
And I really appreciate that. If I can say one more thing, one thing that I didn't mention here yet, but I've noticed a lot in other people that are in the unblack metal scene, is there is a very strong empathy for other people amongst people involved. And even, I would say, even in the secular black metal scene, it's covered up a lot by the bluster and the imagery. Even people I've talked to there, they really care about other people a lot, even if they say otherwise. There's actually a lot more love there than you would think, given the content and the sound of the music. And I know that I really love people and always have. It's absolutely anyone. I'm delighted to meet them, talk to them about anything they would wish. And just know that where I'm coming from is anything good about me, it comes from Jesus Christ. Because without it, I would be, I'll just say I was a very, very hard to deal with young man. And as I've gotten older, as a result of my religion and stuff, it's gotten a lot easier. And I've learned to, like I said, open the chest and expose your heart, because that's the only way you're going to find other people. And you get a lot more love back than you would think you would get.
That is so beautifully said. And T, may the Lord continue to bless you as you continue to open yourself up to the world through your art, and may He continue to lead you in that path of a deeper and more intimate relationship with Him, and all of those things that you are still working through and struggling. He has given you the victory over those, and you will walk away from those. I mean, years from now, you're going to look back and say, "Oh, I don't know why I used to do that, but being with Him and being in His presence is more sweeter, and I don't ever want to do that again." And I'm looking forward to seeing you continue to grow and how God's going to use you. Thank you so much for this time today.
No, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
lithoscry.com